This week on the show, we have a FreeBSD Foundation development update for you, tell you a little bit about sprinkling in the TrueOS project, and tell you about dynamic WDS. And if you don't know what that is, then it's high time that you should watch BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 192, recorded May 3rd, 2017. Hi, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Ju.
And we have a great show, as always, prepared for you, so we should get right into the headlines this week. There's one about OpenSSH.
Yes.
What's that about, Alan?
Yes, so the OpenSSH project has completely removed the code for SSHv1. So that's been disabled by default for a while now. So anybody who's needed it has known that they've needed it and had to mess around to get it. But now that code has been completely removed, which simplifies the code of SSH quite a bit because it no longer has to be like, well, if it's v1, do this. Otherwise, if it's v2, do this, and so on.
Mm. Yeah, people had this in their SSHD config line in the protocol section where it says 2,1 and the 1 is now removed totally, and also in the code, of course, and the client as well. Yeah, this one is pretty much no-brainer for most people who are tracking the OpenSSH latest versions. But this one will make a definite cut, removing all the support for protocol version 1 of OpenSSH.
Yeah, I think one of the previous updates made the code not compile unless you specifically asked for it at compile time. But this time they've actually deleted the code entirely, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, it's been about time. I mean, it's been a while announced, and also people had time to switch over, and I guess most people won't even know about the change.
Yes, SSHv2 came up in 1998, so hopefully you've been using it. And anything made since like 2000 should be using it, and hopefully you're not still using some appliance that's now 18 years old.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, yeah, and there's pretty much they described it as a mercy killing and a cause for major celebrations. So I guess people will open a bottle of beer or whatever beverage you want to open about that one to celebrate that.
Yeah.
People can find the details in the show notes, and if they want to look at the commits that started that by Damian Miller, they are also linked in the show notes, and you can really drill down what kind of sections in the code were deleted. But I guess most people won't be interested in that. They just run along with version 2.
Yep. So then we have the April update from the FreeBSD Foundation. If only we knew someone who was on the board over there or something.
Yeah. So this is relatively new, pretty fresh. It's a development projects update, and it's talking about the USB mass storage target project update. So basically this mentions that FreeBSD runs on many embedded boards that provide a USB target, or so-called USB OTG on the go. This allows the embedded target to act as a USB device and presents one or more interfaces, usually USB device classes, to a USB host. That host could be running FreeBSD, Linux, macOS, Windows, Android, or some other operating system with USB support. USB device classes include audio input or output, like headphones, mass storage, like USB flash drives, human interface devices like keyboards and mouse, and communications, Ethernet adapters, everything you can basically find on a USB port. And so the foundation awarded a project grant to Edward Napirala. I probably didn't get the second name right. Yeah, but he was awarded a project grant to develop the USB mass storage target driver using the FreeBSD CAM target layer, CTL, as a backend. And the project allows FreeBSD running on an embedded platform such as a BeagleBone Black or a Raspberry Pi Zero to emulate a USB mass storage target, commonly known as a USB flash disk or stick. The backing store for the emulated mass storage target is on the embedded board's own storage media, and it can be configured at runtime using the standard CTL configuration mechanism. There's a utility called CTL admin, or ADM, and the ctl.conf file will store the configuration for that one. And they also go a little bit more into detail. They show basically how you can configure BeagleBone Black to as a flash memory stick attached to a host computer, and it's relatively easy. You basically load the CFU mass and the iSCSI loadable modules into the kernel, and also load that into bootloader.conf so that it gets reloaded once you reboot your system. Then you basically create a little flash drive, configure it as a memory disk, and then put in this case, a FAT32 file system. Is it FAT32? No, it's an MS-DOS file system.
Well, that's FAT16 by default.
Yeah, right. And then basically they provide a text file on it, and then they connect that to the CTL ADM tool, and then on a MacBook, they look at that file basically because that's imported from the BeagleBone Black to the host computer. In this case, it's the Mac, but it could be any computer. And then they see the file that was created on the FreeBSD system. Mm-hmm. So that way you can see that you can export these devices on the go to another system. It's pretty neat.
Like what I was looking for when I was trying to turn one of my little embedded devices into a rescue system for a server. Where if it was connected over the USB, where it could possibly emulate both serial and a USB disk, so that if the machine didn't want to boot properly, I could, over USB, expose an ISO image or something saying, hey, boot off this instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, boot support, I'm not sure about that, but it's just
as far as the machine on the receiving end, like the Mac is concerned, it's just a USB device. And so it should work.
It's pretty much transparent.
I might have to try this out then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to know which other devices have this type of device, or like the OTG connector.
Yeah, a couple of the USB stuff you can buy from your favorite vendor for your, like the BeagleBones or the Raspberry Pis. Mm-hmm. They almost all of them have this OTG support.
Yeah,
I've been dabbling a little bit with it with my 2 Raspberry Pis Zeros.
Mm-hmm. The devices I have are mostly these MIPS, the Onion Omegas. I don't think they have that, but it'd be nice to play with a couple of the different things and see what's what.
Mm-hmm. So, and yeah, people who want to try that out, they can grab that from the FreeBSD FTP in the FreeBSD 12 current snapshots.
Nice.
So they have that.
Thank you to Edward for working on that.
Yeah. Thanks.
So next we have an update from the TrueOS project. And so I'm doing some spring cleaning, hardware upgrades, and a preview of the upcoming changes. So the much abused TrueOS build server is experiencing some technical difficulties, which are slowing down building of new packages and releasing of updates. After some investigation, one problem seems to be a bug in Pooter's port building software. After updating Builder to a newer version, some of that instability was resolved. Thankfully, we won't be relying on this server so much because we're finally getting new hardware.
Woo!
The TrueOS Lumina contributor and so this would be our producer, Q5sys, has donated an old machine he had managed to scrounge. I guess not that old of a machine, but it's a 4 CPU server. So a Xeon E7 4870. So that's 4 sockets. Each of those sockets has 10 cores and 20 threads. So in total, they'll have 40 cores and 80 threads.
Excellent.
Yes. And it's also got 196 gigs of RAM.
Oh, yes. I can see that thing putting out a lot of work and ports and all that stuff.
It's got a Fusion IO drive SSD and a bunch of 15K RPM SAS drives. Plus a ConnectX-2 10 gigabit NIC. 40 gigabit InfiniBand. So somehow I think they're going to be able to go pretty fast.
Yeah, that would be nice to see some specs and benchmarks maybe when they got it set up.
80 cores.
There's some pictures there for the people who cannot get enough inside servers and how it looks like with that beefy machine. Yeah, it's a cool machine, definitely. And I guess they will put it to good use.
Yep. So then they have a preview of the upcoming unstable and stable releases. In general, they have an update to their NVIDIA graphics driver detection. I think that would have helped me. I did an install on another machine recently, but it was an older Core 2 Duo or Core 2 Quad with a NVIDIA 8500 GT or something. Old enough that it takes the one older NVIDIA driver, like the 340, not the 380 or 375. And so I had to manually install the NVIDIA driver. It didn't detect and install the right one. It tried to load the newer one, and the newer one gave me a message saying you actually need to use the older one because of your card is being older. But they have boot environment fixes, virtual box issues that are being fixed. They got the new icon themes we talked about the other day, and they're also removing the legacy PC disk manager since that hasn't been worked on for a while.
Okay, so remove that, yeah.
So they've made a couple other changes coming to the stable branch. They're removing the text installer because it hasn't been maintained and is falling out of date. There's now going to go back to a single TrueOS install image. So the single image that you can burn as an ISO or write as an image file to a USB stick instead of having the two separate ones. They've cut the size of the ISO and image files down by about 500 megabytes to be about 2 gigabytes even. Basically, they removed Firefox and Thunderbird from the default desktop install so that they can save all that space. Those will be replaced with Cubzilla and Torjita.
Never heard of that.
I know Cubzilla is a browser, so I'm guessing the other one's a mail client. Of course, you can install Firefox and Thunderbird back just by using the sysadm app cafe after you get the OS up. They're removing Grub as an installation option, so they'll just do with the FreeBSD bootloader, which works better. For EFI, they're going to use Refind as the master bootloader for multi-booting. So that'll make it easier if you want to multi-boot and using EFI, it'll be pretty easy. And they've added QPDF view as a default PDF viewer to the default base image.
Yeah, that one is not so resource hungry as other viewers in that category. Yeah, nice. So yeah, thanks Q5sys for donating that big machine. And yeah, check out the updates in the unstable TrueOS section and report back anything you like or something that's broken or whatever you might find.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing the new update. But if you need a new server, and maybe you want, 1 socket or 2 sockets or 4 sockets or 8 sockets, then you probably should talk to the people over at IX Systems. You can tell them what it is you're trying to do, and they can build a machine that'll do it for you. It's possible to get to 80 threads nowadays without going to 4 sockets, which is 2 sockets, but, whatever you want to do. You tell them what problem you're trying to solve, and they'll help you spec out the right hardware to do it. They know a lot about the requirements for different things and whether you're going to use it as a database or a file server, if that file server is going to serve, Office files or video files or back VMs, all of those require slightly different hardware setups. So you tell them what you want to do, what problem you're trying to solve, and what minimum level of performance you need, and they will help you design the right system for it. I just got a couple more systems from them, and what we did there was get a special motherboard that's narrower so that the video cards can fit. Especially now that we're looking at our next generation of this hardware, we'll have a double height video card, which in a typical one-use system, you can't fit a double height video card because the motherboard takes up the bottom row, and that means you can only have a single height card even when you turn it sideways, and it gets, it's already practically touching the motherboard. And in our first iteration of the hardware that we originally used the GPU on the CPU instead of a dedicated one, when we retrofitted dedicated GPUs in, the SATA port cables, the cables out of the SATA port stuck up like right where the fan for the GPU was, and that wasn't good.
Bad position.
Luckily, we replaced them with right angle SATA cables so that they wouldn't stick up into the fan. But yes, with this special SRW motherboard, the motherboard is narrower, and so the card can go right even flush with the case, and you can fit 2 cards, or in this case, a double height card. So the fact that they can get a custom proprietary shaped motherboard that will be able to actually let me fit this video card into one new machine without having to buy a much bigger chassis and take up more space and all that is definitely very helpful. I've seen some other custom designs they've built have involved custom metalwork, and they'll make it happen and get you the machine you want.
Yeah, that's a customized solution, very customized in this case. And IX Systems are the people not only knowing about the hardware, but also combining that with you have a different requirement for a web server than for a database server or for a NAS server. That's what you want to check out on their website as well. The FreeNAS offerings.
Warranty stuff is great. I had a hard drive die, and so they sent the advanced replacement. I shipped the old one back. And of course, I noticed when I plugged the new one in, it already had 3 days of power on time where they had done the burn-in test and made sure that the new drive wasn't just going to die on me when it got here. Right? They didn't just ship the new one fresh in the box. They tested it first.
That's what they should do as a good hardware vendor.
Well, in particular, hard drives have a much higher chance of failing in the first 48 hours than any other time in their life. And so the fact that they ran those first 72 hours for me meant that I didn't have to worry about it. I, put the new drive in the server and let it resilver, and I'm confident it's going to be fine.
Yeah, and if you want to build a similar server, then check out ixsystems.com/BSD Now, where they provide a free PDF for the ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source, where they provide little tips and things you should ask your server vendor about.
If you ask your vendor all 11 of those questions, then you'll probably decide that you want to buy from IX instead.
This week on the show, we're joined by Patrick M. Housen, founder of Punkt.de in Germany, and he will tell us a little bit about his company and what they are doing. So the first question we always ask our interviewees is, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get involved with Unix and BSD?
Hi there. Well, I was born in 1968, and that was for one part a lucky time because I grew up into the heydays of microcomputers. So my first system in 1984 was a VIC-64, and I did programming in BASIC and the Pascal and stuff, and I even learned C on that machine. Eventually upgraded to a Motorola 68K based system, an Atari ST. And then I read about something called Minix, and that Unix and whatever was the professional stuff you wanted to have. I mean, at the time, everybody, Commodore with the Amiga, Atari, Acorn, everybody promised that they would eventually be able to run this mythical Unix thing on their home and student systems, which, of course, they never really delivered. And we all know how the processor wars turned out. But there was this Minix thing, and the very first time I grasped the concept behind pipes and background execution and multi-programming, I was hooked. I knew this was the thing I wanted to do, and I wanted to have, and I wanted to hack on. It was just amazing. So at that time, I was still doing military service. And then when I started studying computer science in Karlsruhe, of course, I had to work for a living. And at first I was assembling PCs. They still ran MS-DOS and were limited to 640K and stuff. And eventually, my boss came to me and said, "You like to tinker with advanced stuff, don't you? I have this customer who wants something strange called Xenix by SCO. Here's the box. Can you make that work on our hardware and deliver that to him?" And so I got into doing SCO, system administration for a living, Xenix and Unix, and then I have been exposed to various System 5-based systems over the years. The finest I ever encountered was made by Siemens in a collaboration with Pyramid. That was really a marvelous piece of engineering running on the MIPS RISC architecture. And my exposure to BSD came pretty late, because that was when I left that job. That was in 1985, 1986, but, oh, pardon, I'm lying. No, I'm not. Yeah, 1992, 1993, Linux started to become all the rage. That was about that. And I was still with that very same company, and I was asked to investigate this new Linux thing, and it all felt so wrong. If you came from commercial Unix and used the first Slackware or SLS system, nothing was in the place where it was supposed to be, and all your Unix knowledge was worth nothing. And then I encountered FreeBSD 1.0. And for some reason, although there is a System 5 BSD difference, FreeBSD felt right from the beginning. It was all carefully engineered, well-structured, well-documented. I mean, heck, there were man pages for every single command and stuff like that. So that was great. And in 1994, I visited San Francisco for a vacation, and I managed to meet with Jordan Hubbard privately.
Oh, really?
Just for dinner. Yeah, sure. And cool. He invited me up to Walnut Creek. I mean, Walnut Creek was a business that they made a living by shipping CD-ROMs. Listen, kids, can you imagine that? They sold physical CD-ROMs. And I left my meeting with Jordan with an entire backpack with the entire portfolio of Walnut Creek, one of each for me, and 50 freshly printed FreeBSD 1.1 CDs to do some advocacy and evangelism in Germany.
Ah, okay.
That's what I did. So FreeBSD from the start.
Yeah, so
okay. Then later, I left that company and joined a couple of guys, and we founded our own one, starting out as an ISP with Cisco gear and first Solaris machines. Then later, we introduced FreeBSD, and for the first time, the fights Linux versus BSD started. But since I was the guy with the most in-depth knowledge, I managed to actually convince the others that BSD was the better choice. And it turned out that argument popped up quite a couple of times during the following years. That was 1997 and onwards. I mean, then we were running all our servers on Pentium 2s that we assembled ourselves with FreeBSD 4, which was a marvel of stability. Not quite multiprocessor capable, but we only had a single core at the time. So that is how I got into this whole BSD world. I had local meetings. Christoph Kukulius held one in Aachen with Jörg Wunsch. I got to know PHK, Paul-Henning Kamp, and was quite active in the community, providing support in German Usenet, another thing almost forgotten. And stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
that's quite a history.
And that led into, I guess, your company using FreeBSD for the last 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose BSD and what kind of things you use it for?
Well, my personal choice of BSD was due to its stability, its good documentation, the well-organized structure, which just conveyed a sense of quality that Linux utterly lacked at the time. I don't want to start into a contrilogy-like rant here against Linux. On some parts, I don't know enough. But Linux has evolved. It's quite a major system, but FreeBSD had this. This is done by professionals who know what they are doing right from the start. A very good and assuring feel to it. Even the rocky days through FreeBSD 5, when the SMP revamp started and everything, And then FreeBSD 6 was, of course, as stable as 4 was supposed to be. So we were quite happy again. That was what I particularly liked. And when we turned from internet access and internet services company to a software development company, that why don't we use Linux argument used to turn up quite often, because the developers just wanted the convenience of being able to Google for a quick answer and copy paste some code, or to apt-get install something. And we had quite a learning curve in the operating department where the problem actually lay. We knew how to run our FreeBSD systems, and we said, hey, it's great, you can compile everything from ports, so you can fine-tune options, and you can use port upgrade to automatically upgrade everything. But actually, people who focus on application development most of the time don't do that. They just want to get their job done and use the system. So we gave them, say, now a Vagrant box with FreeBSD 8, 9, 10 in it, and current PHP, whatever installed. And then it would work on that box for a year without any updates, any modification. And then it would occur to them that they would need Node.js 2 point something. And of course, they had an utterly outdated system, completely outdated ports collection. When we told them, well, it's easy, just update the system, just run port upgrade. And then, of course, things break. If you're so many months away from head imports or from a stable release engineering release and the base system, and compilation will break, dependencies change, ports get moved. And all they wanted was to be able to say, apt-get install Node.js. And we had a hard time, a little bit of in company fighting about what was the best platform. And the solution to that, because we were always convinced it's so much better, it's got infrastructure, not product. So it took us a bit to realize that we needed to get our respective butts in gear and deliver on that promise. And, for example, set up Poudriere and build our own package repository. So now we have the best of both worlds. We have early access to PHP 7, to PHP 7.1, way earlier than Debian or Ubuntu or every other distro you have. But the developers still have the convenience of being able to say, package install PHP 7 and be done with it. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit more work for us operators. But finally, we're delivering on the promise that we made when we said FreeBSD is better, and we have a shorter time to release new software and stuff, and the ports collection is so great and everything. Yeah, that's one of the reasons now why we keep using it in the company. And for the moment, at least, everything is quiet and the discussion is over, and the developers love us because, as I said, we can deliver new versions of mostly PHP, MariaDB, and everything, way faster than the Linux distros can.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely a benefit if you are running your own company internal Poudriere. So are customers coming to you because of your BSD infrastructure, and are you actually or actively promoting that?
Unfortunately, not quite. We just started promoting it. That's one of the reasons why I was asking for an interview, because in Belgrade on the EuroBSDCon last year, I got so much feedback where people said, hey, I know what you guys are doing. Why aren't you promoting the fact that you're FreeBSD hostess much more? You could get more customers. Actually, what we're plugging now is that we're running enterprise PHP applications. Mostly content management systems like Typo3 or Neos. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar with Typo3, Alan.
Oh,
Benedict, you should.
I have to use Typo3 at work. Let's leave it at that. It's an older version, but yeah.
if you have competent support, it's actually quite good. Yeah. It is an enterprise system that is hard to set up, and where the layout and CSS is completely separated from content. So you need an agency that sets it up for the editors. But when everything is done competently, I dare say that the editors have a quite good life in Typo 3. Right. It's nothing you just slap on a server like WordPress or Joomla or Drupal and get running all by yourself, unfortunately. And we specialize in hosting these kinds of applications.
Cool.
Okay. This is where it started at last year's EuroBSDCon. This is a nice connection.
Yep. So what other technology are you using to automate all this and running all these applications for customers?
The foundation of the service used to be NanoBSD, because I liked the idea of being able to have prepackaged images and have these two partitions that you could switch, so you could do a convenient rollback. The problem was that we had not quite automated the creation process of those NanoBSD images, so sometimes there were omissions, missing packages, something went wrong. And we had quite a hard time doing regularly quick and timely updates with that. And then we set up a couple of weeks of an internal project where we invested deeply into Chef.io and built quite a bit of knowledge around Chef and how to apply Chef to servers. And we started with ZFS, of course, at the time. That was 2 years ago. We started with that. So now we're doing regular installs, no NanoBSD anymore. I mean, boot environments give us the capability to roll back. And packages are installed with Chef and configured with Chef. And then the customer can deploy his or her application to the system. And we can do updates. We do updates now via FreeBSD update and via package, because we have our own Poudriere, so we build every night of the quarterly ports branches. So we have current packages with all the latest security fixes all the time. We are currently investigating if we should invest further into Chef or if we should switch to Ansible, because Chef is quite heavy as far as the required stack is concerned. It's very powerful. I really like it. It was my first Ruby project. I learned how to program Ruby a bit. And this concept that everything is an object is just amazing. That you can slap parentheses around anything, then put a dot at the end and invoke some method. Well,
3 times do.
If your main programming languages have been Bourne Shell C and Arc all the time, then Ruby is quite a revolution. So that was funny. Yeah, the other core technology is, of course, ZFS, which has been made possible by the vast amount of RAM and CPU power that current machines have. Let's say 5 or 6 years ago, the 8 gigs of RAM, of course, requirement would have been quite prohibitive for all our machines. Now we don't install anything with less than 16, and ZFS runs quite smoothly. That's pretty good. Yeah, so that's it. Poudriere, FreeBSD, Chef, and in the written questions, I don't know if we're already there. You asked about the fully automated data center. Well, we're not quite there yet, but we try to automate with infrastructure as code methods as much as possible. And one feature that I don't think that much people use is that we have a complete unattended PXE install of new machines, including ZFS.
Wow.
So manually enter the MAC address into the DHCP server, fire up the machine, go grab a coffee. 15 minutes later, you have a working system with a Chef client on it that already registered itself at the Chef server.
Cool.
Good.
Did you have to do a lot of work to build that?
That was mostly a weekend or a couple of evenings. I don't remember. I knew how to PXE boot FreeBSD. The documentation on the FreeBSD site is actually quite good. And
from the docs team, yeah.
Yeah. And so I knew how to boot it into interactive install over the network. Mm-hmm. But getting the fully unattended install was a bit of fiddling because contrary to other areas, this is not well documented and still a bit in a brand spanking new moving state, specifically the ZFS parts.
Yeah.
So I had to figure it out by reading the source, by experimenting, trial and error, essentially, until I got it working. But no big deal. I mean, I'm fluent with shell scripts, so as long as you don't force me to debug Python or something, which I just don't know, I can always make some progress. On your last show, you had an interesting paper that you presented on copy and paste security flaws introduced by answer sites like Stack Overflow and stuff. And I mean, this does not only pertain to coding, but also to system administration.
Yep.
Which is one thing I wanted to mention, and a small promise. I'm in the process of writing up a blog article about Pixie installing FreeBSD. Because if you just use your search engine of least distrust, the documentation you find outside of the FreeBSD handbook is outdated and sometimes unnecessarily complex. People go to length to use Linux sysinstall or something to copy the FreeBSD ISO to a RAM disk, then mount from that on stuff. And actually, it's pretty straightforward and simple. So I think a current documentation on how to do that is in order.
Yes, I was just going to ask, because I know lots of different people doing Pixie boot auto install of FreeBSD, and each one of them is doing their own thing because there wasn't a good documented, already done one. I think publishing yours might save a lot of people a whole weekend.
But the point most people seem to struggle with is that FreeBSD absolutely wants to mount its root files via NFS. And they go to great length to avoid that. And my question is, why?
Yeah, NFS is not scary.
Not at all. I mean, of course, it's not considered secure. You can hear the spoken question ticks around it. But you do installations in an isolated, controlled environment, like a separate VLAN or something, not connected to the internet. And I mean, you're running a DHCP server, you're running TFTP, which is just as insecure. So if it wants NFS, give it NFS. Yes. What's the problem?
Yeah, it's super easy to configure with ZFS. Just share NFS equals on.
Really? Is that code in BSD? I didn't know that. I thought it was only in Illumos and Solaris.
NFS does work in FreeBSD with the ZFS properties.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
But you still have to manually start NFSD and stuff from rc.conf, right? Yeah. Okay.
But with sysrc, that's pretty easy to do, right?
Yeah, this could be part of the blog post. Like, you provide some bits, and everyone has a couple of things to add, and then at the end we have a nice little blog post that covers everything. Yeah, cool.
And again, I could show to our developers that you could go to user source, and then that's distribution or something, or tools, and then you say make CD-ROM, and you get a complete install medium.
Yeah, under release.
That you can then copy to your TFTP and then an FS route.
And go from there, yeah. So I've been browsing your webpage a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit of your Pro Server product that uses CFS in FreeBSD jails?
Of course. The original product we had was called Pluspunkt Hosting, another German pun on the Punkt and other stuff. This was the NanoBSD setup, and we ran the customers applications in Apache vhosts. So it was all just one kernel, one shared user land. So we could not provide SSH because we could not easily change root SSH with a full stack like PHP and everything. And of course, we also investigated hypervisors. We tried jails a couple of years ago and not really continued to use them. because with UFS and the way we did it at the time, they didn't buy as much. Jails just duplicated the number of machines, duplicated, tripled, quadrupled, whatever. Each jail was its completely independent installation. So you just had to maintain it independently like it was a separate server. And the hardware was not yet that powerful that you actually needed to slice it up for different applications, but you just were happy if you got enough performance out of one machine for one application. So we tried jails, then did away with them. And it first occurred to me that jails would be the way to go when I started using FreeNAS at home. And I saw the FreeNAS jail plugin system, and I thought, well, with ZFS, that could be really, really shiny to combine both things. Which it is. It is. With a twist in our case, because if you look at the old and outdated Warden jail management system or on the default operation of IO Cage, we started with the shell-based IO Cage and then collaborated with Brandon on working on the new Python-based. Then it's all the time it is, okay, we install something we call a template, and then we do a snapshot of that template, and then to instantiate it, we do copy on write clones, which is perfectly understandable if you know the inner workings of ZFS. Mm-hmm. It's cheap and it's fast and it's convenient. I finally managed to attend Kirk's kernel class in Belgrade, which was great fun. So I got a good overview now about how all that stuff fits together. And but from an operator's point of view, you want something different. What I want as an operator is I want UnionFS semantics. I want to have something like a FreeBSD CD-ROM that is live, that I have underneath the customer's system that I boot, and the customer can modify whatever he desires on top of that. And I can exchange the bottommost layer to provide updates and to add stuff. And of course, we all know that UnionFS is broken and won't be fixed. But I want that soon. I want that functionality, and you don't get that because as soon as you snapshot a ZFS data set and then create clones from it, the snapshot is cast in concrete.
Yeah.
So what we are actually doing is with IO Cage, we create an empty jail, and we create what we call template jails, which are actually not IO Cage templates, but that are just the installations with all the goods the customers need. So we install FreeBSD 11 patch level. We are at 8 currently, and PHP 7, and Redis, and Memcache, and Nginx, and MariaDB, and whatever you need. And we never boot that jail afterwards, but we just locally loopback mount it into the customer jails. So we do a nullFS mount that is read-only for all those bits that we want to exchange. So when we need to update that, and we have, say, 20 customer jails, depending on what we call a template, then we just need to, say, change root. I mean, that's the beauty of jails. You don't actually need to have it running. If you have name resolution set up correctly in the jail, you can change root into it, use the host networking stack, and do things like package upgrade. And whoopee, 20 customer jails get upgraded in an instant.
Yeah.
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 And if you do a snapshot first, you can even roll back.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
you should do that.
You should. So
just in case.
Our architecture. So we're using IO Cage for the management of the jails, but we're not using all of its features, specifically not the IO Cage built-in templates. And for all the bits that are for the customer to actually write, we create separate data sets and again mount them on top. So the customer data are in his own writable data sets, and the data that is maintained by us, like the operating system bits, all the middleware, the applications he gets from us, are in the other data set that is mounted read-only. And then we can give the customer root access and he can administrate the system, change configuration, but he cannot install software. That is the service we provide. We are responsible for security updates, so that's the line where the border of responsibility of the different parts of the system.
Yeah.
Okay, seems like for the customer, relatively easy to manage.
But yes,
solution.
it would be nice in the future to have some kind of layering file system that, even if it's relatively simple, that just does the right thing, right?
Yeah, I read some discussions on the mailing list about that, and it seems to turn out that UnionFS is inherently complex in terms of deletions, that you actually cannot get it to work. And I was actually quite surprised when I investigated ZFS and I found all these marvelous features that it didn't provide something similar to UnionFS. But now, after I know the inner workings a bit more, it's obvious, because it does copy on write not on the file level, but it does copy on write on the block level.
Yeah.
So we're stuck with what we have, but that is not much of a problem. So a typical customer jails consists of about 10 ZFS datasets, 2 of which are, for example, for the MySQL database or MariaDB, because we do special tuning as far as block size and stuff is concerned. And we still get awful performance for MyESAM, but we tell customers just to use InnoDB, please.
Yeah, most of that performance is not to do with the file system.
Yeah, big write amplification here.
Yeah. There's a patch coming up to ZFS that will improve the zpool import and mount speeds when you have a lot of data sets, which I'm guessing if you have 10 plus, so you'd have over 100 with 10 customers on a machine. That one's not so bad, but I have a couple of machines with like 400 data sets, and you sit there and watch it mounting the file systems so many at a time, and it's like, it'd be nice if that was faster. But they just created a pull request upstream for a way to parallelize that and do some prefetch on it, and it should do something like 2 to 16 times faster for importing and mounting all the data sets. So
okay,
look forward to that.
Well, actually, we leave the mounting to I/O cage. Right. We have them set to can mount off, and and we have an FS tab that tells I/O cage what to mount where via nullFS mounts. And that's one of the problems we still face with the platform. With a shell-based I/O cage and 30 active customer jails, it takes about an hour for the entire machine to boot.
I think part of it wasn't just that I/O cage was shell-based, it was that it was using ZFS properties to store stuff, and that turns out not to be a great idea.
Okay, it isn't?
Well, it works, but it's, the ZFS properties weren't meant to be read, every couple of minutes, or worse, written very frequently.
Okay. Tell Brandon about that?
Yes, I think the newer Python one doesn't do that anymore.
Well, it does, sort of, but possibly it doesn't do much writing anymore. Just write once, read on every startup properties inside the ZFS. I don't know. I will have to check that. Yeah, so the last customer waits about an hour if we have a maintenance window upgrading the host machine, which is not satisfying.
Right.
See into improving that. The other point is that with FreeBSD 10.3 at least, the VNet stuff sometimes fails on us, and we get kernel panics and spontaneous reboots. It looks a lot better for FreeBSD 11, and we're currently in the process of updating the last machine to FreeBSD 11.
Okay. Right. So can you give us a quick rundown of what other services your company offers?
As I said, the main focus is actually on software development and then hosting our own application. But we have quite a bunch of customers who just host with us and have other agencies doing the development for them. Additionally to just servers, we have, of course, load balancing, high availability setups. We have a dedicated enterprise-grade firewall. which is a commercial system based on FreeBSD. In case you didn't know, the McAfee Firewall Enterprise is FreeBSD based. And we sell domains. We sell SSL certificates, although I expect that to go away eventually with Let's Encrypt. We already make the free Let's Encrypt offer for everybody who asks for it. And everything infrastructure based around doing business on the internet. So we're targeting specifically enterprise customers, but we don't decide what is considered enterprise on the size of the customer or the volume of business or everything, but just people who know why they are on the internet, who either directly make money and revenue on the internet or provide their customers with necessary services, opposed to people who just want I'm here too, and this is me, and then 5 years not touched homepage stuff like that.
There are many of those around. With the changing landscape that you are having in your, not only in the company, but are you also contributing code back to the community, or are also otherwise engaged in the community?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that question beforehand, because it took me a couple of minutes to come up with the most important and obvious answer. Well, we organized 2 EuroBSD cons. And
right.
And that was we as a company did that, and we didn't earn a penny from that. So that was a big contribution, I think, and also a lot of fun. Actually, EuroBSDCon 2010 in Karlsruhe was the last time I met Des and PHK in person.
That was my very first conference for BSD.
Always fun to hang out with the Scandinavians. I remember Brighton when we had a dinner at the social events, and I happened to end up with all the Scandinavians, mostly the Danes. And one lady at the table was an English teacher. So from the UK, and then she got a history lesson about the history of England, as told all the Danish people, and she was in for quite a surprise. That was great fun. So that was 2 conferences, and I used to do quite a bit of support and evangelism, which I don't do anymore during the last couple of years. But we're trying to find our way back into the community. Hence the interview. I proposed 2 talks for EuroBSDCon in Paris. Hopefully at least one of them will be accepted. One is about specifically our pro server architecture in more detail. So if the talk gets accepted, listeners can expect a presentation and much more technical detail than we can provide just talking. And the other one is if you remember, we had mentioned this NanoBSD stuff that we had, and that the process of creating the images was error-prone and manual. So with the experience we had employing this infrastructure as code stuff for our new data center architecture, I turned all the legacy things wherever I could into Vagrant boxes. So now I have a Vagrant box that fully automated creates a NanoBSD image, so I can be sure it will be the same all the time. And the other presentation is about how to use Vagrant to create a blank custom Vagrant box with FreeBSD in it.
Cool. Well, there's definitely a good way to get back to the community, is just sharing what you've learned and so on. There's lots of other ways to contribute than just code.
Doesn't have to be code all the time.
Because, I imagine you find, much like we do, that most of the time the code is fine, and I just need to glue it together.
Use it in an interesting way and provide value for the customer.
Isn't that what hacking is about and what the fascination is? I mean, I just can't do it. Somehow I got into networking and systems administration, and I simply can't code kernel stuff because I lack so much knowledge. Yet I've always been trying to understand how the things work to become a better systems administrator. So I have a vast library, all the daemon books. As I said, I attended Kirk's class, because if you know how ZFS works for some surface part, the visible part, then you can much better judge on how to employ it. And you know what we're talking about? Why my ISAM tables in MySQL with many small writes must be slow, and why it is better to run InnoDB and stuff like that. So it all, I say, you cannot know too much. That's
never.
Yeah, it's when you even just understand some of the basics, it's easier to reason about what's happening. By looking at all the observability tools you get with BSD and ZFS, you can see, what the application's doing and what the system's doing, and you're like, okay, well, the application's writing a lot, and the system's waiting and then writing in a big chunk, and then waiting and writing a big chunk. Like, that's what I expect. Or all of a sudden, well, ZFS is doing all these small writes individually, and it's going slower. And because you understand what ZFS is doing, you can reason about why that's happening and what setting might make a difference there. I had one customer recently was trying to use the FIO benchmark or whatever on ZFS and was finding that it'd be really fast at the beginning and then get really, really slow. And it's like, well, you didn't change. You're asking it to do 4K overwrites, but you have the record size still set to 128K. So you're doing lots of reads in order to do these writes. But then you also have trim turned on in a VM where it doesn't actually have an SSD. And so you're hitting the IOPS limit you set in your hypervisor, just sending trim commands that are actually being ignored by the hypervisor. So change this setting and everything's better now.
Great. Yeah. For example, one funny problem that customers sometimes encounter when they have dedicated servers and code their own applications and don't know that much about system administration is that they start to complain about the system being slow, backups taking forever, the security checks, those daily mails, they come in later and later and later, and then you find out that they log stuff from the application to some directory and they never clean up. And they have a UFS file system with 1 million tiny files in a directory. And if you know how directories are implemented, and that even with a UFS dir hash and everything, eventually it's all a linear read all the time to find a new empty spot, for example, to place a new file, then it's perfectly clear that having more than a couple of thousand files in one directory is a very bad idea.
Yep. And then even if you break it up, you still, you probably need to increase the size of your dir hash, otherwise you're not going to be able to read that directory very quickly. Yep. So are there any other conferences than EuroBSDCon that you attend to try to stay informed about what's going on?
Yeah, of course, there's networking stuff like RIPE meetings, because we're a RIPE member, of course, running our own autonomous system, and default-free BGP and everything. And then I attended an OpenStack summit in Atlanta once to get familiar with the technology and what all the hype was about. I'm trying to keep an eye on Docker, so I was on another conference in Cologne, so there's a little bit of cherry picking here and there. And then, of course, most of the developers attend the Typo 3 and NEOS and PHP specific conferences. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but not us operators. Yeah. not that much. I mean, DevOps to me doesn't mean that everybody needs to do everything. I won't turn into a developer in this lifetime, and most of the developers don't won't turn into an operator. It's just that we need to draw some line of responsibility somewhere, and then, for Christ's sake, talk to each other. That's what many companies, in my opinion, are lacking, and we've been doing that essentially all the time since we, as a company, exist, which is pretty good.
Okay. So, from your point of view, is there anything missing in FreeBSD that you need in the company or anything?
Well, I would love to see ZFS memory management integrated into the FreeBSD VM system, because we lost the beauty of the send file system call, for example. Mm-hmm. And run UFS, and you have an open network descriptor, and you have an open file descriptor, and you can just say, "Dear kernel, please send this file over this network pipe," and you will never context switch again, and there will not be a single in-memory copy. And with ZFS, you lose that. You get an in-memory copy for every block of that file, because ZFS resides in its own completely separate memory segment. But I do understand that this is in no way an easy task, and I'm not able to do it.
Right.
And I'm just curious if someone has got this on some roadmap and will eventually start to work on it. That would be great.
Yeah, there might be a way to do a less complicated hack to, instead of trying to merge the two, which would be rather difficult, but to make send files copy that normally would go in the VM be able to steal the buffers from the ARC, and so that you don't end up with the second copy, and possibly could have the kernel just take the pages from the ARC and write them to the network for you, or pass them around that way. But it's only really been talked about at a high level. I don't know that anyone's even done an initial investigation on what it would take. But yes, we would like to see that, especially now that we have Netflix having a version of SendFile that does the SSL encryption for you as well, where you set up the connection in Nginx and then say, take this file, encrypt it with this key, and send it out the network card for me, all without switching back and forth.
That's great. Actually, I have seen the same technique employed in various parts of the kernel now when I've been talking to George Neville Neal in Belgrade and to Kirk, when my knowledge was quite outdated. So essentially, I took that class to get a fresh up on modern kernel architectures and what changed in FreeBSD. I'm still at Uresh Vahalya's New Frontiers and the first edition of the Daemon book, at least I was, before Belgrade. And George, for example, told me that whenever they needed to optimize data structures in the networking code, where they had linearly linked lists, and that would perform bad if you have a couple of thousand individual IP addresses, for example, with jails and IPv6 and everything, that they would not try to revamp the entire code and tear it all apart and place a new data structure in it, but they would sort of do a look-aside buffer. So they would keep the existing linked lists that are new from Stephen's implementation book intact and just implement an additional quick lookup mechanism that points to the very same data structures in the linked lists. So if I got you correctly, then you're aiming to do something similar with the ARC and the SendFile system calls. So
yeah, so it would integrate it for
the blocks.
Yeah, it would integrate it for SendFile, but not actually integrate the ARC in the VM fully, which would be, that's somebody's master's thesis.
Probably more than that, yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, there's one thing, and I have one pet project that I figure will become more higher on the priority list as time goes by for a data center, and that is high availability storage. You can do all this fancy stuff with ZFS, with send receive, the replications. FreeNAS has got them out of the box, and they're quite convenient to configure. Everything is great. But I've not seen much documentation on how to actually do a failover and what best practices exist to do this. I can imagine many different ways. We have, for example, the JOM-based approach with JOM Gate, and then we can put a JOM mirror on top of that, or we can use JOM Gate and that puts ZFS on top of that. Or we can use an iSCSI target and put ZFS on top of that, and run two copies of the same data set on two different machines.
Yeah, so, there's also HAST, H-A-S-T. That's JOM based, but not quite. But I think the current ones that make the most sense are probably the CTL high availability. So that's the iSCSI one, where you can have two iSCSI targets that are talking to the same physical disks, so that if you have a shelf full of disks and two head programs, the client can connect both to both iSCSI targets at the same time and fail over when one of the links goes down or whatever. That helps you if one of the heads goes down. It doesn't help you if the disk shelf goes away, though.
Yeah, I'm currently experimenting within VMware Fusion with a setup that does this with two different machines. Mm-hmm. So you have one iSCSI target on one machine, one iSCSI target on the other machine, and then on one of the machines, you use both of these targets, both via iSCSI, even the target that is on the very same host, to create a ZFS mirror. And if the active node fails, you can do a ZFS import on the other node and keep running on one of the two copies, and resync later. And I'm not quite sure if that is the best way to do it. If I should be using a JOM mirror-based approach and then put ZFS on top of that, or whatever. So again, for Paris, I suggested a birds of a feather session on high availability storage.
Yes, I would like to talk about that one too. Because the other one, there's two other things coming up. Later in the show, we're going to be talking about PNFS, which doesn't yet do high availability, but the idea there would be, an NFS store where it's backed by multiple FreeBSD NFS servers, and eventually you could have redundancy there so that if one of them goes away, all your files are still there. And then another option was... I'm blanking with the other... there's Munio or something. Chris talked about it
Minio.
For FreeNAS, Minio. Which allows you to emulate something like Amazon S3. And you can say that every block that or every object you put into it is stored on at least 2 or 3 of your backing servers. And you can create high availability that way.
That needs changing your application.
Yes, that one's not a file system, it's an object store.
That leads to the discussion we've had a couple of years ago when cloud services were first introduced, because the people who were on top of the decision chain and not that much technically involved, like my CEO, they read all about this. Yeah, you can buy computing power as you go, just as much as you need, and we can scale horizontally and we can scale arbitrarily. And I said, why don't we do this? Why can't we do something like this? Because you cannot slice up Typo 3 horizontally. It's one big mess, not really, but it's one big system.
It wasn't designed that way.
Local POSIX, file system semantics, preferably a local database. The database must be MySQL. There's a database abstraction layer, but none of the extensions uses it. So even if the core would be able to run on Oracle or whatever, you have a hard time implementing an actual application with anything but MySQL. So these type of applications that expect a full LAMP stack simply do not scale on cloud. You have to change the application. I mean, there is work going on porting Ceph to FreeBSD, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so, yes.
But at least our developers and our applications demand local POSIX semantics, and I'd like to provide that in a highly available manner.
Yep. So for HAST, if you go to wiki.freebsd.org/HAST, HAST, all uppercase, there is a recipe for doing ZFS with mirrors and automatically and carp. And so when the machine that's the slave notices this carp interface go up because the master has gone down, it does the zpool import and brings things back online. I'm not sure how great it is, but it's enough of a recipe for someone to start with and experiment with it and see where the gaps are.
Yeah, I've read about HAST before, not in the ZFS variant yet. So thanks for that update. Yep. Gonna check it out again.
Yep. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we let you go?
I think that was that.
Okay.
I mean, thanks a lot for having me.
No, thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for a great show. And well, before we say goodbye, maybe one thing. You had Chris Moore and the show before your last one, and I invested quite a bit of time into testing, debugging, filing bug tickets, and supporting on the forum the FreeNAS Coral. So yeah, that was quite a slap in the face. But I don't want to go that road now. I just want to, if you're interested, one remark on the features of that Coral provided, because they closed the particular forums and the threads that are applicable to Corel. And I think Chris will eventually listen to the podcast too. So when testing, I found sometimes that Corel was trying to do too much. And specifically, I mean, it did too much in combining things that are not necessarily tightly coupled. I really like systems that provide orthogonal building blocks that you can combine freely. So if you have a management interface for VMs, there is absolutely no need, from my point of view, to create or even overwrite ZFS ZVol if you create a new virtual hard disk for that VM. In my opinion, these should be two obviously separated tasks. An experienced system administrator will, of course, get the idea that you need to create the block storage, and then you can attach the block storage to the VM. The same for the shares. FreeNAS Corel lumps the creation of a Samba share and the creation of the underlying ZFS dataset into the same user interface part and forces you to create the dataset the moment you create the share. And I was having a hard time importing my already existing dataset and create new shares that would just use my existing directories. So I went all the way down to directory shares and not dataset shares, because essentially Samba and NetAtalk and all these services don't know anything about ZFS. They just work on files. So I think software should strive to provide like bricks, orthogonal blocks that you can freely combine and eventually even come up with things that the developers didn't think about, and not trying to tightly couple things that are essentially separated.
Yeah,
So
that's been kind of one of the unofficial mottos of the FreeBSD project is tools, not policy. We provide the tools for you to do whatever you want with it, and you decide which way you want to do it.
Yeah. Still, I cannot say that I'm quite happy with what happened to Corel and the route FreeNAS is taking now, although I can fully understand the decision the company had to make. And let's see how FreeNAS 11 turns out. I've already installed my first copy, and I'm giving it a spin. And yeah, let's see.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, they're still in the transition phase, and things have to be shaken out or shaken up to see which directions they're going to take. But it's going to be interesting to see how it's going to evolve.
Yeah, I think it's just Corel cut too many corners and tried to, like you say, in trying to make it really easy for people, they took away the ability to do anything. Like we saw users where they had an existing dataset or directory, and they would try to create a share of it, and they would end up creating an empty ZFS dataset over top of it, and it would look like their files were gone because they mounted an empty directory over top of the full one now, and all they want to do is share this existing directory, not create a new ZFS dataset necessarily.
Yeah, precisely my point. So thanks.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's that.
Yeah, and see you at EuroBSDCon in Paris.
Yeah, and in Karlsruhe at the Goulash
Programmer Night. Yeah, I'll be there, and yeah, it would be nice to meet you there.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
See you guys.
This week's episode is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Go over to digitalocean.com and you can sign up to get your free, or to get virtual machines running FreeBSD or whatever OS you might use. And they start at only $5 a month. And once you sign up, if you add the coupon code FreeBSD Now to your account, it'll add an extra $10 of credit into your account. We've talked a lot about DigitalOcean, although we used them specifically quite a bit this last weekend at my company, where we needed a lot of extra servers, but only for the weekend. So we could rent the servers on an hourly basis at a much lower price. You can see here, we rented servers that normally cost $160 a month, but we rented them for just, it's like 23 and a bit cents an hour. So having them on for 3 days doesn't add up to very much at all, considering we had 36 machines spread across all the different data centers that DigitalOcean has. But what we're really interested in is they're very shortly will be introducing a new type of droplet, a high CPU droplet. So if you look at their current pricing, they have their standard ones, and every time you double the price, you get twice as much memory and twice as many cores and twice as much disk space. However, if you just want more memory, a while ago they introduced the high memory droplets, which allow you to get 16 gigs of RAM without having to get 8 cores and all the extra space. If you just needed the RAM for whatever you were doing, then
in-memory database
or a varnish cache or whatever you were doing, you could do that. So there's that. But if you want maybe not necessarily a lot of RAM, but you want to do a lot of CPU, maybe even it's just because you're running, well, maybe Minecraft's a bad example because you probably need RAM and CPU because it's Java, but
a CPU intensive
yes, if you're doing video transcoding or something and want just CPU and not a lot of everything else, they're going to have those coming soon as well. And you can sign up for early access from the link on the front page right now.
Mm-hmm. Might also want to check out their community pages where they post a lot of tutorials and things to set up, like a web server or in this case configuration management or Prometheus dashboard. So there's a lot of stuff to explore there in their community section.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So moving on to the news.
Yeah, we have a couple of good news for people who are working or have a need for Wi-Fi, which we all do, I guess. So we have a blog post from Adrian Chet, our senior Wi-Fi developer on FreeBSD. So he basically sat down and did some work on actually something that's been in the tree for a while. So it's basically dynamic WDS. So what's that about, Alan?
I don't know. I thought you read.
Okay, so the blog post, it describes it as a technology for. So basically, it's been in FreeBSD since forever, and in theory, it should actually just have worked, but it's extremely not documented in any useful way. It's basically the same technology in earlier Apple AirPorts before it grew into what the wireless tech world calls proxy STA, and is what the extender technology on Qualcomm Atheros chipsets implement. So common question that Adrian all the time gets is, why can't I bridge multiple virtual machines on my laptop and have them show up over Wi-Fi? It works on Ethernet. And that's what this is all about.
Well,
and his response is, well, when I make dynamic WDS work, you can just make this work on FreeBSD devices. But for now, use NAT. And this always makes people sad because they want to use it like their Ethernet connection.
Yeah, I definitely know that I've run beehives on my laptop before and wish they could use the Wi-Fi. And I've had to use NAT instead of just bridging them. So this looks really interesting.
Mm. Yeah, and he talks a little bit about, what the problems are code-wise, that they're in these frames that you send back and forth. There is a problem that there's apparently not enough MAC addresses to store. And so you can basically define, please send this frame to this station's MAC address, but then have them forwarded to another MAC address attached behind it in the bridge. And that would require 4 MAC addresses in the 802.11 header, which we don't get. He wrote, or continues to write, except we do. There's a separate address format where from DS and to DS bits in the header set to 1, which means this frame is coming from distribution system to a distribution system, and it has 4 MAC addresses. The RA is then the access point where you're sending to, and then a 4th field indicates the eventual destination address that may be an Ethernet device connected behind said STA. So he goes into a little bit more detail. The important part is at the bottom, there is a description where he tried it out, and basically he said he dug into it, and basically it turns out that dynamic WDS uses a helper daemon, VLAN DS, which listens to dynamic WDS configuration changes and will do things for you. This is what runs on the central access point side. And by then, he said that made more sense to him. He followed the script that is provided in the source/tool/net 802.11, and he followed that script, modified it a little bit to use encryption, because encryption wasn't provided in the original script, and well, it half worked. Association worked fine, but no traffic was passing. So he used TCP dump to dig a little bit deeper into where the problem is, and a little bit more digging showed the actual problem. The dynamic WDS example scripts are for the open and unencrypted networks. If you're using an encrypted network, the central access point side needs to enable privacy on the virtual interfaces. So traffic gets encrypted with the parent interface encryption keys. So he provides a little config section that you can set up, and with that, to the shell script passed to it, then an interface was created that made everything work. So now he has only to do a little bit more testing, because he has only ran it for like 5 minutes, and there might be problems coming up as long as the system is running in a longer time period. So, but with these instructions, basically, you could set this up. And he's going to do a lot more testing and development and see what kind of problems there are. But basically, he says this is what he needs at home. He can't see the home access point from the upstairs room. And you now see why I care about WDS. And so when I start using it daily, I'll fix whatever hilarity ensues.
Nice.
So that's what is going to happen there in that area. So Wi-Fi work is always good to see in FreeBSD.
Yes, especially when it's something that, somebody has the drive to do, because they just want to be able to use their Wi-Fi upstairs and downstairs.
Right.
So our next story is from Dan Liu, and he says, a friend of mine and I couldn't understand why some people have so much trouble debugging things, right? The material seems like common sense. So their question is, why don't schools teach people debugging? It turns out maybe it's not that easy.
Right. I had a discussion with George Neville-Neal about this regarding the Teach BSD materials, and we were thinking about doing a similar course about how to teach debugging or general debugging principles. And this is probably connected to that.
Yeah. So he says there's the Feynman method, which is the only tool you really need. A is write down the problem. 2 is think really hard. And then 3 is write down the solution.
Yeah, if only it would be that easy.
Yes, this is, the Feynman method failed us on our last project. The design of a divider, a real-world scale project, of an order of magnitude more complex than anything we tried to tackle before. On the day he assigned the project, the professor exhorted us to begin early. Over the next few weeks, we heard rumors from some of the other classmates working day and night without making any progress.
Yeah, I can think that this is a very common case in university settings. I certainly have been there, and I've also seen students trying to struggle with that because they don't know how to approach certain problems, or don't have the tools available, or don't know, how to, from which angle to approach the problem and tackle certain, or divide it up into smaller bits and all these things. They aren't generally be taught, and students sometimes are intentionally left in the dark to find their own solutions. But in general, it would be nice to teach a little bit more, the approaches to tackle certain problems, because some problems are really hard and they need special approaches to be solved or find a solution.
Yeah. This is up until 6 p.m. the night before the project was due, he and all his friends had ignored all this evidence of other people having troubles. We said that didn't surprise us. Half the class always struggled with the assignments. We were in the half that breezed through everything. We thought we'd start the evening before the deadline and finish up in time for dinner. We were wrong.
Yeah.
He tells a bit more of that story. But he says, I understand now why half the class struggled with the earlier assignments. Without an explanation of how to systematically approach problems, anyone who didn't intuitively grasp the correct solution was in for a semester of frustration. People who were, like me, above average but not great, skated through most of the class and either got lucky or wasted a huge chunk of time on the final project. I've even seen people talented enough to breeze through the entire degree without ever running into a problem too big or unintuitive to understand. Those people have a very hard time when they run into 10 million line code bases in the real world. The more talented the engineer, the more likely they are to hit a debugging wall once they get out of school.
Right. Yeah. That's something that can happen because they didn't had the problems at university to solve. And
so they didn't actually learn the process of methodically solving the problem because they were able to just intuit that what the problem was on the easier problems. It's one of the most fundamental skills in engineering, starting at a symptom of a problem and tracing back to find the source. It takes, at most, half an hour to teach the absolute basics, and even that little bit would be enough to save a significant fraction of those who wash out and switch to non-STEM careers. You say, we do not leave material out of classes and then fail students who don't figure out what the material is for themselves. Why do we make the first couple of years of engineering some of the kind of hazing ritual where you have to learn debugging yourself, right? Instead of simply teaching people what they need to know to be good engineers. For all the high-level talk about how we need to plug the leaks in our STEM education pipeline, not only are we not plugging the holes, we're proud of how fast the pipeline is leaking.
Yeah. And I mean, if you have these skills, then you can pretty much tackle any problem, because even the problems that you don't know about yet, you have the right, tools and approaches to get into the mindset of attacking that problem. And if you haven't tried that yet or sharpened your skills in university or in the education in general, then it's difficult to learn it while you have the problem right in front of you.
Yeah. He says he agrees that a few students might take an inordinately large amount of help, but it would be strange if people who were capable of staggering amounts of memorization required to pass the first year of engineering classes plus calculus without deeply understanding algebra couldn't then learn to understand the algebra they had memorized. He says, I'm no great teacher, but I was able to get all but one of the office hour regulars up to speed over the course of the semester. An experienced teacher, even one who doesn't care much about teaching, could have easily taught this material to everyone. So anyway, it sounds like there is a very interesting story in the rest of this article. We don't have time to read the whole thing, but I recommend checking it out. It sounds like a fun story they went through trying to figure out their class problem at the last minute.
Yeah, which is always the worst case scenario.
Yeah, or the most common case scenario.
Okay.
Or both.
Yeah, right. All too common, unfortunately. Yeah.
So now we have some interesting news. We hinted at it a little bit earlier, but Rick Macklem has posted the first call for testing for PNFS, which is basically NFS 4.1 with the ability to have a distributed NFS.
So P is parallel.
Yeah. So we now have the parallel NFS server that I think is ready for some testing and evaluation. It's basically a patch against FreeBSD current kernel plus the new NFS daemon. It uses FreeBSD and nothing else. You don't need GlusterFS or anything like that. It's just all raw FreeBSD. And he's got an example of the setup that kind of explains it. A Plan B PNFS server consists of a single metadata server and then some number of data servers, or DS, all of which should be some recent FreeBSD system. Clients will create their mount by connecting via NFS to the metadata server, and the metadata server will have a file system that will contain entries and everything for all the files, but for your actual regular files, rather than just directory entries and symbolic links and so on, the actual file data, there will be empty files on the metadata server. And then as an extended attribute of the file system, it'll say the actual block for this is on one of the data servers over here. And the PNFS client on the client system can take that information and go connect to the right server and get the block and read the file. And it'll look like your regular NFS file system, except for you can say aggregate all the storage of many ZFS pools into one super NFS dataset. Sounds good to me. It also mentions that if older NFS clients connect and don't support the PNFS thing, the metadata server can proxy for them. So that will create a bottleneck eventually, but it also means that it's backwards compatible with applications that don't support PNFS.
That's good. So you have a way to migrate to that one, or
so
at least to
on the metadata server, any regular files you create are actually empty, and they'll point off to some of the other servers. And then the attributes will have the information about how big the file is, the modified time, all that kind of stuff, and where to find the file. For each regular file, the MDS creates a data store file on one of the data servers in one of the DS number directories. So you can create those as separate ZFS datasets, possibly to spread things out and chunkify it. The name of this file is the file handle of the file on the metadata server in hexadecimal, and it uses 20 different directories to avoid creating one really large directory. At this time, the metadata server generates a file layout for NFS 4.1 clients that know about PNFS, or it can proxy for clients that don't. The limitation currently is the current setup does not allow for redundant servers. If the MDS, which is the metadata server, or any of the data servers fail, the entire PNFS service will be non-functional, right? Because a bunch of the files will be missing. Or if the metadata server goes away, then you're completely hosed. They're currently looking at creating a mirrored DS server plan so that, you can say, when we write a block to server X, also write that same block to server Y, so that if one of them goes away, we still have all the data. He says, but it's probably about a year before they'll have an implementation of that. He says he's also planning on using the flex file layout for this, since it supports client-side mirroring, where the client will write to all the mirrors concurrently. So that means that instead of when a client writes, they write to one server and then the metadata server has to manage copying that to the second server. The client will know that it's connecting to a mirrored PNFS, and it will write the file to both different nodes. And especially if you have, say, lags, like the multiple links aggregated together with the different MAC addresses, you can actually, it can be a good way to take advantage of the extra bandwidth that's harder to use over NFS oftentimes. Anyway, we look forward to hearing people's feedback when they actually get to try this out and see how it works. There's all the instructions you need to compile it in and everything. So we look forward to people getting to play with this. Hopefully I'll have some time because I'd like to play with this as well. It would solve some problems we have where, we put a bunch of customers on this one server and then it was running out of space. So if we could, create a PNFS where we could combine all of the space of a couple of ZFS servers, that would solve all of our problems. So, time for the Beastie Bits. Our first one is changes of note for OpenBSD number 620. I guess he just decided to jump randomly to a large number.
That's already off to a good start.
Yeah. So he says 6.1 is old news now. What they've got recently is support for the Intel 8265 and 3168 network cards. They say zero some more kernel memory before using it to prevent padding leaks if a structure ever changes. That's cool. They have some changes to libTLS, specifically allowing you to retrieve the whole certificate chain. This somewhat contradicts my original mandate that libTLS not expose any of the gnarly X509 details to the user, but certificates are a fact of life, and if you're going to build a certificate chain download tool, you're going to need to use this. You're going to want to use this cool API, right? So we say reality eventually corrupts all of our dreams. He says also a sneak peek, some adjustments to the library internals to allow RelayD's privilege separation engine to work with libTLS.
Okay.
They've also got some changes to tmux, including tmux clients now having names. He said there's also a lot of other small improvements that have happened over the last 6 months that he didn't really notice, and when you put them all together, they're quite interesting. They changed syslogd's internal logging code, and it's more consistent and less snowflakey, so that's good. They have their never-ending project to add sizes to all the free calls in the kernel, and that's moving along. They have 64-bit bus address support for the MSK driver required by the onboard NIC of the Overdrive 1000, which is one of the desktop-y, workstation-y ARM64 machines that you can get. They also have a CRES sensor during suspend and resume so that callbacks aren't running on drivers that aren't attached anymore. So they make sure that they're all in a good state before they suspend and then pull them out of that state once they resume. And they say they introduced a new zero free call to libc, a function that combines explicit B0 and free, but in a potentially optimal way. If the memory can be directly unmapped, then it doesn't have to do the extra work. And then they started using that in a bunch of places. And they also want to mention there's a bug in the installer that some users might have ended up with an extra /6.1 in the URL of their install URL, and they'll have to pull that out in order to not connect to, /6.1/6.1, which won't exist, and then the installer won't work.
Okay.
Here's an age-old question for you.
Yeah. So this one is why Unix commands are short. If you have ever thought about that question, we have a video here and an extract from a longer video that explains that. The description goes, I was watching videos about my favorite topic, Unix history, and found a talk by Hendrik Jan Thomassen. He's the Unix pioneer in the Netherlands and has worked with Thomson and Ritchie in the past. He says the real reason why Unix commands like ls, cp, move, etc. are short is because PDP-11 console keys were super hard to press. You'd get knuckle pain if you type too much. So to save your fingers, all the commands were designed to be as short as possible. True or not, that's a fun story. And if you want to get the full information, check out the video. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. They have some old videos on here that look quite interesting as well. Have to check that out.
Yeah. Okay.
Now we have a new release of OpenSense 17.1.5, brings several long-term improvements for the firewall handling, dynamic DNS, and a bunch of the plugins. They also have Quagga and Monet are two of the brand new ones that they've added. And especially a long-term improvement to the German translation is now 100% complete, apparently.
Okay, great.
They've also been testing the move to PHP 7.1 and hoping to put that on the roadmap as part of the 7.7 release that'll come out later this year. Mm-hmm. And there's a full changelog over at the link if you want to check it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a new OpenSense release to check out, and report anything you find, if it works or not, to the OpenSense folks. Our next story is about something for Apple Dual GPU users from the Dragonfly project. So there's a commit, apparently, from Francois Tijon about the Apple Gmux driver from Linux 4.8 import. So the description reads, some Apple laptop models with dual GPUs use a special GMUX device in order to connect video outputs to a particular GPU or the other one. This driver allows the use of Intel graphics on MacBooks having an onboard additional NVIDIA GPU. Yeah, I have one of those. So he basically renames the driver to Apple_GMUX since hyphens are not welcome in Dragonfly's kernel module names. And that's something people want to check out if they're
so it seems what this lets you do is for the external port for the projector, allow you to control which the video cards it connects to. So if you say aren't using the NVIDIA one to save battery, you can have the Intel one connected to the projector, or you can decide that, hey, I have the NVIDIA up, let's use it so that the video I want to display on the projector plays more smoothly or whatever. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that might be something other projects might want to check out. And
then we have
the next one
call
is
for testing. Yes, actually, our friend Seven Janian posted this year's annual Package Source Con is being held in London in July July 1st and 2nd. There'll be an evening social event on the 30th of June beforehand. So, kind of similar to the goat boff, but probably without a goat. Although maybe we'll have to send the goat with 7 so it can go.
Yeah, that would work.
On July 1st, we'll hold a day of talks at the British Computing Society, thanks to the open source specialist groups. While the primary focus is on package source, the theme of the day is building and packaging open source software in general and the challenges we face. Details for general attendance will be available soon, but in the meantime, if you would like to present a talk on such a theme, please send the title, slot duration, a minimum of 15 minutes, and a brief description for the website or whatever to 7@netbsd.org.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so package source is used in a lot of projects, not just NetBSD, so
yes.
you might want to contribute to that one.
Illumos and so on are doing it. I know there's going to be a talk. There was a proposed talk for FreeBSD Con about using package source in order to have the same packages built for a bunch of different operating systems. So if you mix, say, FreeBSD, Illumos, and something else in your environment, something like package source allows you to have one package repo that you can compile all your packages on for all your different target OSs.
Mm-hmm. That's why these conferences are important to coordinate efforts.
Yeah, and then we have the TrueOS/Lumina developer Q&A for March 5th. So they say some of the TrueOS and Lumina developers wanted to get together for a live little QA session, and they're going to cross-pollinate it over to the TrueOS subreddit, but they asked the developers a bunch of things, and we'll see what some of them came up with here.
There's a couple of...
Ask, when will there be a new Pico image? Is there a plan to devote more time to it, or is it going to go away? And he says they're going to be keeping Pico, and they're not clear on what's going on with FreeNAS. Oh, the old PBI format is definitely going away, though.
Yeah, that's been announced a couple of months or weeks ago already. Yeah, it's been a while.
But anyway, there's a bunch of questions and answers in there. So if you're interested in what's happening with Lumina, go check it out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, actually, the Q&A period is this Friday, so you have time to submit questions as well. So you should go.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll see what comes out of that.
Yes, and the feedback section this week is brought to you by Tarsnap. Go over to tarsnap.com/BSD Now, and you can sign up to get your very secure backups for the truly paranoid.
Yes, if you have to move backups into the cloud, you might want to use Tarsnap, because that way you can rest assured that these are encrypted with the key that only you own, and you are the only person who can decrypt those backups, and no one else, not even Colin Percival, the developer and owner of Tarsnap. And that's what you want to have. You're the only person holding the key to all the data you want to upload into your personal Tarsnap account. And there's a bunch of documentation available for it, describing how the system works, and the 3 or 4 main design principles: security, flexibility, efficiency, and utility. And all these were described in a little bit more detail here. So Tarsnap is your go-to source for online backups into the cloud.
Yes, it's simple, easy. You can compile the source yourself. You create a key. You keep that key secure. Don't lose it because you can't get your files back. But the whole point is that if you don't want anyone to be able to get your files back, you can destroy the key, and now no one can get the files. So keep this key secure, but you might want to make a backup of the key, because if you lose it, then you won't be able to restore your backups.
Yeah, and if you've ever used tar before, the tar command, then you know how to use Tarsnap as well.
Yep. So our first feedback question is from Peter.
Peter, okay. Peter writes that in Indiana he's located. So as a relative noob at FreeBSD, I find the choice of tools for constructing jails to be a little overwhelming. What are the relative merits of the different tools available? EasyJail, IOCage, others. And how do I choose? Am I better off doing it in the manual way without using a tool? And in your opinion, are there any of the existing tools likely to be included in the base system in the future? Are there any tutorials that show step-by-step how to put something like Apache or NSD DNS in a jail?
Okay, so the tools, pretty much any of them work. It kind of depends what your focus is or what your goal is. I've used EasyJail, although it's because I've been using it forever. I know lots of people like IOCage. Both work fine, and it depends what you want. IOCage is very specific to ZFS, but I use EasyJail with ZFS all the time too, and no problems. I don't think either of those is going to be in the base system. The base system has some basic jail stuff. It's what we use in the FreeBSD cluster. It works too.
The problem with that is the manual way is requiring you to rebuild your whole system into a certain directory or a later jail directory. And that can be a little bit complicated if you haven't done that before.
No, although you can extract the tarballs
in the manual,
or use the installer and so on. Now, for step-by-step for setting up something in Apache or a DNS server is, well, once you're inside the jail, it's just like as if it was a FreeBSD VM. So you just install Apache like you would anything else, or like you would on the base system. So you just do it.
It's acting like the regular system that you have. It's just stripped down a little bit and doesn't have a kernel, or certain things aren't as integrated. Like if you're looking for doing ping, sometimes that doesn't work if you don't enable that, and that's a little bit different. But these special things are documented, and also there are workarounds to enable that as well. So try it out. I recommend IOCage if you're running a ZFS, and EasyJail works as well. So
yeah, you can also do it manually if you want. It's just if you're a noob at it, then something like IOCage or EasyJail makes it a bit easier.
For the very first jail, the most problems that I had with my first jail was getting the network running and connecting the jail to the network.
Yeah. So next, Andrew writes in. He says, hi, Alan and Benedict. I have a couple of questions. What do you guys think of these hot new programming languages like Go, Rust, etc., with the features they bring and the problems they claim to solve? Will we ever see FreeBSD base systems components written in them? So Go is very interesting. The problem right now is Go would require importing the Go compiler into FreeBSD in order to compile it. Although I think there's something upstream in Clang to be able to compile Go with Clang. So maybe someday. In general,
it's always difficult to put stuff into the base system because not everyone uses that, and everyone has different use cases. So we want to keep the base system small enough to be appeal.
Well, also, once you add something to the base system, it's rather difficult to take it out because now people depend on it being there.
Then people,
and so, you'd have to have a really good reason to use Go, and you'd have to use it for more than one thing for it to end up in the base system. But Go binaries work great on FreeBSD, and you can lots of applications you can install and use that will work that way. It's fine. So number two, especially with package base, it'll become less of a delineation there, and then it'll be fine to be able to have Go. So anyway, number two says, I'm currently doing a computer science degree. Unfortunately, my university doesn't offer any operating systems courses. Do either of you have a book or online course recommendation? Well, there is
So that strikes me a little bit as odd, because usually if you're doing CS, then you also do operating systems, at least a basic course. But what you can do is look at the TeachBSD GitHub repository, and there is a undergraduate course that George Neville-Neal has taught at my university 2 times already, and the material there is touching basic operating system principles. It's not everything in there, but most of the stuff like file systems and processes and virtual memory and networking, that's all in there for a basic scratch the surface overview of what operating systems do. You could also look out for other operating systems courses. A lot of universities have their course material online for operating systems. If you want to start with a book, then if you want to really go deep into the implementation, and you could probably look at the design and implementation of the FreeBSD operating systems, although that's a lot of detail in there. If you're a beginner, you might be a little bit overwhelmed with that. There is the book by the Minix developer, whose name escapes me at the moment, Tannenbaum, the Tannenbaum book. That's pretty much the go-to book for every computer science student. It's something people have to, it's showing its age a little bit, but still the concepts are in there. They're still valid and are used in operating systems nowadays anyway. So that's still something to go to get a brief or a good overview into the operating systems. Depending on what other parts you're looking at, having a CS degree is usually good. And if you have operating systems knowledge, that's even better, because operating systems integrate into a lot of other areas of computer science, networking and graphics and memory management in general. So all this can be helpful if you are, going to work after you acquired your CS degree. That's why I was a little bit surprised about there is no operating systems course.
Well, most people that go into computer science don't ever write code for an operating system. They write applications.
Yeah, but you don't necessarily have to write operating systems courses. If you learn operating systems in the university, at least in my, you learn basic concepts like why is there an operating system in the first place, and why do we have memory management and an IOMMU and all these things, and what is required to put these all together.
Yeah, so for question number 3, he says, one day I'd like to contribute to BSD. Does FreeBSD have a list of low-hanging fruit? Yes, we have a wiki page called Junior Jobs, and it's all small jobs like that you should be able to get started with.
You could also look at the bug tracker. If you find something that's easy enough to work for, maybe you can provide a little patch or polish a patch a little bit up so that it works with the latest version. And that's something usually people do they pick up small things, work on that, and say, hey, on the mailing list, I got this little bits of patch polishing done, or I've found a solution to that problem port that was reported. And that way they get, over time with small steps into the community and, one day become a FreeBSD developer, which we hope you do. Yes. Because we can never have enough people.
Exactly. So yes, I'll grab a link to that and throw it in the show notes. Mm-hmm. So what's our next question?
The next question is from Steve. It's about TrueOS and the bootloader. He says, hey, Alan and Benedict, I've recently been trying to get into FreeBSD, but I've run into an issue. Graphics. I have a laptop, a Gigabyte P15FV5 with a link to the Gigabyte website, with a Skylake CPU, an i7, and an NVIDIA graphics card using Optimus, so I'm not going to bother with it and disable it in the UEFI. So my question is, how do I get the Skylake graphics working? I know TrueOS works, but I'd rather learn with vanilla FreeBSD.
There's no Skylake driver for vanilla FreeBSD yet. You can use, although, yes, there is the DRM next branch, which you can compile, I suppose.
Yeah, he knows about that, apparently. He tried that out. He found three forks of that one. He links all 3 in the message he sent. So he asked basically, which do I use?
I think the main one, not one of the forks, but I don't actually know the answer to that. And then, you'd have to
which one is
the... So I don't know if any of them provide a ISO at the moment other than the TrueOS one. So I think TrueOS is your best bet. It's not that different. Well, it does have a number of major differences nowadays. It used to be, when it was PCBSD, it wasn't that different from FreeBSD, but TrueOS has diverged quite a bit.
But I guess TrueOS is pulling one from one of those repos.
Yes, it is.
It's just a question of which one.
Yes, he was saying he wanted to be more closer to vanilla FreeBSD, and TrueOS has done things like replace RC with OpenRC, and so it's not that much. But in general, it's mostly still FreeBSD, and so for now, for Skylake, it's probably your best bet, because building your own graphic stack or building your own version of the FreeBSD graphic stack patch is kind of a lot of work. And I don't actually know which repo is the right one at the moment.
Yeah. So you might ask the TrueOS folks about that. There's another thing he writes. One last thing, I've been having another small issue. The bootloader is invisible when using UEFI. When I boot into FreeBSD, TrueOS, or Dragonfly, which I know is a fork of FreeBSD, once I get past the UEFI, the screen is just black. I press enter and I boot into the OS. I see the bootloader when I boot in BIOS mode, but BIOS is really slow compared to UEFI. He says his laptop uses an AMI UEFI in BIOS with the version applied as well. Do I need to tweak some settings, or is it time to learn fork?
So you're having to press enter to continue? That's unusual. Normally there's a countdown and it's relatively short and it should just go.
Well, that just waits 10 seconds to let it.
Yeah, well, on TrueOS, I think they shortened it to 2 seconds even to make it boot faster.
Yeah, it's the auto boot delay in bootloader.conf setting. But in general, there should be something displayed on the screen, isn't it?
It might just be that the resolution it's trying to display is not valid for his monitor because it's a laptop.
That could be.
And it just can't display something at low resolution, maybe? I don't know. Yeah. Hopefully somebody that knows more about this will see this and be able to answer your question, because I can't.
Yeah. Check out the manufacturer website. Maybe there's an update for the UEFI or the BIOS that fixes that issue.
Yep. So next, Ben asks, he says, I've been enjoying the show, though I'm currently just running mainly Arch Linux. I have some interest in BSD, though, and plan to start watching it. I definitely plan on setting up a free NAS in the future. When I have the funds, I will probably play with some of the BSDs on a spare laptop in the meantime. Part of how I became interested in ZFS is in BSD is due to ZFS. I've been running all ext4 file systems and have practiced good backup routines, but I found that one of my drives had corrupted files on it. Running a Smart daemon, but Smart seems to have a high threshold before deciding the drive is actually dying. Hand checking revealed that the drive looks to be on its way to its death, but Smart has never warned him. And of course, all of my incremental backups of these files are faithfully copying the corruption, so the backups aren't even any good. After this, I decided to switch all of my, or at least some of my storage over to ZFS, because, it will warn you when these kind of things happen.
A lot of
Just for the sake of the checksumming, I only have one proper multi-drive ZFS pool, which he'll explain later. But even my single drive ZFS pools at least will alert me about corruption. So he's got a one ZFS RAID Z pool with 3 drives and then 3 single drive pools. He says, I learned a lot through trial and error, making sure to turn LZ4 compression on, setting the extended attributes to SA, setting relative A time on, and making sure the scheduler is no-op. Those are mostly Linux-specific things. In general, on FreeBSD ZFS, we just turn A time off completely. He says, for some reason, my setup was changing my ZFS drives to other I/O scheduler, and I was getting horrible performance on these devices until I figured out to switch the scheduler to the no-op one and let ZFS do the scheduling. And I've started reading the Lucas and Jude books on ZFS. Snapshotting is great and makes incremental backup super easy, moved automatically to a separate pool, etc. He's using Znap Zend. I guess it's Snap and Send spelled with Zs. That's an interesting name. So he's been wondering, among other things, about fragmentation and scrubbing with ZFS as 2 separate topics. There's no connection between them. So, fragmentation. How concerned do I need to be about fragmentation in ZFS? I've read varying things. Also, I understand that ZFS reports fragmentation is actually a measurement of fragmentation of the free space, not the fragmentation of the written data, which is correct. When you do zpool list and it lists a number for fragmentation, that's how fragmented the free space is. And even that's not actually what the measurement is. Its measurement is just, of the chunks of free space that are left, how many of them are really small?
I guess people are more scared by that number.
So fragmentation in the classic sense of the file being in different places, in ZFS, that mostly comes down to if the file was written all at once or if it was updated over time. With copy and write, fragmentation is just going to be a thing. ZFS gets a lot of its performance that it does have from making writes as one giant chunk. So even you write 50 different files or whatever. But ZFS aggregates all that and writes it as one big continuous chunk to write nicely quickly. And then you delete the middle bit of that and you end up with this little hole of free space. And if that happens over time, you can end up with a lot of these little holes. So you have lots of free space, but none of it in nice big chunks that you can use, but all in these little ones. And you can do something like a ZFS send to another pool, or if you have enough space, to the same pool, to try to rewrite those files in more contiguous chunks to free up, get rid of some of the fragmentation. In general, the fragmentation is not going to break anything. It'll just cause performance to slow down. And especially as you get less and less free space. So as the pool gets fuller, the performance will go down and fragmentation will make that worse. And, you can solve it by freeing up space or adding more space.
You can find more in the book.
He says, I'm currently somewhat short on free space and my media drive is already about 90% full. Yeah. Once you get, I think it's 80% or so, ZFS switches its algorithm it uses for finding the free space from, just find whatever free space we can find fastest to find the best fit in order to try to avoid the fragmentation. And that will hurt performance a bit, but for media, you're probably not going to notice. He says, as far as I can tell, currently on ZFS, there isn't much to be done about fragmentation other than trying to leave sufficient free space and or migrating data off and then back to fix it. And yes, that's correct. His second question was about scrubbing. I have a single drive ZFS pool scrubbing daily. Daily is probably a waste of time.
A bit overkill.
Every file is done. The equivalent of a scrub is done on each file every time, or each block every time it's read. So the files you're using are read and checksummed as every time you read them. It's only the files that you never use that the scrub is really going to help you with. And so a scrub once a month or every 3 months even is probably more than enough. So yes, daily scrubbing is definitely overkill. You don't want to do it that much. Again, every time you read a file, it's going to check the checksum. So if you do a full backup once a month, then you've almost done the equivalent of the scrub already. And you just want to make sure that you don't try to do the scrub and the backup at the same time because it'll hurt performance. So, if you do your backup on the first Sunday of every month, do the scrub on the second Sunday of every month. And then you should be good.
Yeah.
And lastly, Steve has a question.
Another Steve, yeah.
He says, you've asked us to send in some questions for the show, and I've got a couple of interesting ones. What are the ways you can run Linux apps on FreeBSD? For example, I'd like to be able to run Linux builds of complex tools like the Vivaldi web browser, PyCharm IDE, or Beyond Compare. There are some brief instructions in the FreeBSD handbook for kernel Linux support, Beehive, and VirtualBox, but I haven't had any success with any of these approaches so far. So, in the older days, it was relatively simple. Now, Linux kind of changes a bit quicker. But if you install the, Linux _CentOS 6 or something like that?
The port, CentOS 6.
Linux base port, it will install all of the CentOS 6 libraries that are compatible under the FreeBSD Linux emulation. And then if you take a version of any of those applications that would work on CentOS 6, it'll work on FreeBSD with those files installed. I think there's some work on the CentOS 7 one. The bit of the problem is that the FreeBSD kernel emulation currently doesn't emulate a Linux 4 kernel. So anything that won't go back far enough for CentOS 6 probably won't work either. But there's work driving that forward, but it's slow going.
Yeah, it's always depending on what, how big the interest is.
Back in the day, I definitely ran the Valve source dedicated server engine for Counter-Strike Source on FreeBSD with just a Linux binary, no problem. And I did Call of Duty 4 and a bunch of other stuff. But
yeah. Otherwise, you just install a Linux Beehive or VirtualBox or whatever your virtualization want to use and run it on that. It's not the best solution, but you can still use both side by side.
Yep.
Okay. I think that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and see you next week. If you have any questions in between, send us feedback at FreeBSD Now, anything that you come up with.
If you have a question, feedback, recommendations, interviews, whatever, just send them to us, let us know, and we will talk to you next week.